Hey, everybody, welcome back to our series, The End is Not the End. As we continue this series, we're going to be looking at various Old Testament prophecies that were spoken hundreds or even thousands of years ago that were believed to foretell the end times. But in a very interesting twist, uh, these prophecies have already been fulfilled. So join me as we look at Bible prophecies that have already come true in a book called The Case for Christ. Lee Strobel presents a case for the resurrection of Jesus. He cites multiple eyewitnesses who saw Jesus after he rose from the dead. And then he talks about a skeptical man named Homer Thomas, who said that he couldn't believe that Jesus actually rose from the dead until he looked at the evidence for himself. And he cited one prophecy that had already been fulfilled, and that was Jesus' prediction about the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. Let's take a look at that prophecy and how it was fulfilled. In Matthew chapter 24, verse 2, as Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, his disciples asked him, "When will these things happen? What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" Then Jesus began to tell them a parable about how the days will come when all of these things will happen. You may know it as the Olivet Discourse. But in Matthew 24:2, Jesus says something very specific. "And do you see these great buildings here? There will not be left here one stone on another. All will be torn down." Jesus was talking about the temple because the temple stood where the Mount of Olives is today. It was Herod's temple and it was massive. It took 8 years to build. It was a beautiful building and it was considered the holiest place on earth. But Jesus was saying that every single stone of that building will be torn down. His disciples asked him, "When will this happen?" But Jesus didn't say when. What he did say was that they would not see one stone remain on another until it's completely destroyed. The Jewish historian Josephus Flavius wrote that Herod the Great rebuilt the temple in 20 BCE and completed it in 64 CE. It was absolutely magnificent. But in 66 CE, the Jews revolted against the Romans and they burned the temple. When Titus came in to stop the revolt, he set fire to the temple, and within 5 months it was completely destroyed, just like Jesus said it would be. So Jesus' prediction in Matthew 24:2 was fulfilled in 70 CE when Titus destroyed the temple. But what does this mean for us today? Well, there are several lessons that we can learn. First of all, Jesus' prediction in Matthew 24:2 was fulfilled. So it shows us that the Bible is reliable. Many people consider the Bible to be a collection of myths and legends, but the Bible itself claims to be true. And if we find that its predictions come true, that gives us good reason to believe that its predictions about the future will also come true. Secondly, this prophecy teaches us that no matter how great our building or how secure we think we are, God is still in control. The temple was considered the holiest building on earth. It was considered the place where God's presence dwelt. And yet Jesus said that every stone would be torn down. We might think that we're really safe inside the church building, and while we are safe spiritually, there's nothing that will protect us if God decides to allow judgment to come. Let's move to another example. In Matthew 24, verse 14, Jesus said that the message would be preached to all the world as a sign to the nations before the end comes. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. This is the verse that Homer Thomas referred to when he was telling Lee Strobel about the fulfilled prophecy. Now let's look at the timeline of this prophecy. Notice he doesn't say that the message will be preached to all the world before the end. He says that it will be preached to all the world as a sign that the end is coming. So he's saying that the preaching of the gospel to every tribe, every nation, every tongue, and every people will be a sign that the end is near. So if the Bible tells us that the gospel being preached around the world is a sign that the end is near, then that means the end must be very near now, right? Well, if you look at this chart, you'll see that this is a chart of evangelization, and it shows us the percentage of people in each country who know Jesus. From 1970 to 2010, the number of people who know Jesus grew from 22% to 40%. That's almost double, and you can see that it's continuing to grow. Right now, the estimate is that 61% of the world knows about Jesus. So the prophecy in Matthew 24:14 that the gospel would be preached to all nations has been fulfilled. The Bible clearly teaches that the end times will not come before the gospel is preached around the world. And since the gospel has already been preached around the world, the end times must be very near. Now, of course, some people argue that the end times won't come until the gospel is preached to every individual on earth, and that would take many, many years. I believe that's a very narrow view of this prophecy. Jesus could have said that, but he didn't. And instead, he said that the gospel would be preached to all nations, which we know is a reference to the entire body of people in those nations, because the word nation in the original language actually means a multitude of people. So if you take into account that definition of the word nation, it's clear that the gospel has already been preached to every nation, and therefore the end could come at any moment. One last prophecy that was spoken hundreds or thousands of years ago that has already been fulfilled is found in Isaiah 44:28. And Isaiah said, "It is he by whom I am brought, whom I have chosen, and whom I will support. My covenant will he observe with me, and he will be my offspring, and he will increase and multiply. I will greatly enlarge him and exalt his offspring forever." What Isaiah is saying here is that he's talking about a descendant of David who will be king over Israel. He uses the name Cyrus, which is very interesting because Cyrus wasn't even born yet. This prophecy was written about 150 years before Cyrus the Great of Persia was even born. Isaiah was prophesying about someone who would come from the descendants of Shem and Abraham, from the line of Arphaxad, from the line of Terah, from the line of David, and he would fulfill three things. He would be a ruler, he would be a liberator, and he would be a restorer, and then he would reign over the house of Israel forever. Well, let's fast forward 150 years to the book of Ezra. Ezra 1 says that King Cyrus of Persia gave an edict that allowed the Israelites to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. And so the Israelites returned to Jerusalem and rebuilt the temple. They resettled the land of Israel and they reestablished the religious worship of Israel, all just like Isaiah prophesied. Now, why is it important to know that this prophecy was fulfilled? Because if a book can accurately predict the future, then it can also accurately predict the future. If it's true that Isaiah 44:28 has already been fulfilled, then it's also likely that Isaiah 44:9, which talks about the Messiah, has also been fulfilled. And if Isaiah 44:9 has been fulfilled, then it's likely that Isaiah 53, which talks about the Messiah's death and resurrection, has also been fulfilled. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to check out our other videos in this series. And thank you for watching